Welcome to the Trail Times with Big Bear Events podcast. This is episode 4. This is going to be slightly different to all the other episodes we've done so far, in that the idea of today is to go over sort of the origin story of Big Bear Events. So we've not had an event in the last week or two, but I thought I'd put something out just to go over where it all began, really, because there are quite a few people that have been with us from the early days that are still with us, that come regularly and that we see at events and so on. But there's plenty of people that have only, who still haven't come to our events, who have only come to one or two, who might have no idea how it all began, why it all began, and so on. So indulge me. I thought I'd give a potted history of I guess me and of Big Bear Events. So I'll try and keep it brief-ish, so I won't go over everything in loads of detail, but I'll just try and pick out some of the key points as we go through. The idea is to then use this as sort of a static episode that I can then refer back to. I caught myself saying, I can't even remember what it was now, but I caught myself saying something, and then on one of these podcasts, and then sort of referring back to something as though everybody should know it, and then realise that no, most of you won't have a clue about what we did in 2019, because you might not have been there, or you might not know why we started, or you might think that I invented 6-hour running, which I very much didn't and never have claimed to. So I thought it'd just be good to do a sort of base level episode, and we'll see how that goes down. In terms of immediate stuff, again, depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this in sort of the middle of February 2025, we've got the Badger Challenge coming up. Just looking now, we've got about 10-ish places left for that, at Beacon Hill near Loughborough. And then after that, we've got the Elephant Challenge, which again, we've got maybe just over 10, 15-ish places left for that, with the Petzel Night Trails 10k in the evening at Southsea Forest as well. So that will be, they are our upcoming events. So if you want to enter those, I'd suggest entering them pretty soon, depending on when you listen to this. If you're listening to this in 2028, you've missed those events. I apologise. But yeah, if you're listening to this when this comes out, then I'd suggest having a look at those events to get entered into them quickly, because they'll probably be sold out before the event, which is excellent, which I guess is part of this story as to selling events out and not selling events out. But we'll start at the beginning, as it were. So in terms of, I thought I'd just give you a bit of history as to me. I'm no elite runner. I'm sure no one ever thought I was, but just in case you ever did, I'm no elite runner. I started running when I was about 17 to try and shift being a short, fat kid, before I went off to uni. So I thought I'd run to lose some weight. This was the early 2000s, so that was a perfectly acceptable thought process, is that running equals weight loss. It's not really how we see running these days. But to be honest, I guess it probably worked a little bit, maybe. I don't know if it did really. But then when I went to university, I used to run quite a bit there, mainly to help with playing football. So I went to Aberystwyth and loved it, really, really enjoyed it. But it's really hilly there, really quite, I mean, especially compared to North Herts where I grew up. Really hilly, and so great training. I've never run on that sort of stuff so consistently since, really. So that was 20 years ago, so that explains my running capabilities. But really liked it. Used to go out sort of really late at night, so I'd go out for like 4 or 5 mile runs at 1 o'clock in the morning, because that's the sort of thing you do when you're a student, I guess. And then I remember there was one, so from Aberystwyth, there's a beautiful beach called Innislas, which is about 10-ish miles away, about 10, 11 miles, which back then I was driving in the car to measure how far things were. I did also have Nike Plus as well, which you used to attach to your iPod. I want to say Shuffle, but I don't think that's right. The tiny little rectangular one, I can't remember which one it was. But you'd attach it to that, and then it would measure how many steps you took. So essentially it's like a fancy pedometer. So it would measure how many steps you took to then give you your rough distance. And then you could go home and plot that on a map. So you then had to draw out where you went. Anyway, there you go. It's a history of awful apps. Well, it's good at the time, but again, we're going back 20 years. So I ran to Innislas and back, and I'm pretty sure at the time I thought it was probably the furthest anybody had ever run, ever. So again, like I say, you don't realise these things, and it was a very different time. I mean, sure, people realise that 20 years ago, people weren't really just running for fun quite as much as they are now. You wouldn't have seen so many people out on the street just running. I'm sure Aberystwyth seafront now, well, I know it is full of runners every single morning, but it didn't used to be when I used to go out running. Anyway, so I did that in this last run. I used to wear a big, thick cotton yellow hoodie to do my running in as well, which obviously is not really the way to do it these days. Anyway, so loved it. Left university, went to London, worked for HFEC, lost my soul there because they were some awful people and doing awful things. Some lovely people as well, but a lot of people higher up that just weren't very nice and just had no moral compass at all. So was running quite a lot then as well, but never really much more than, I don't know, sort of half marathon distance. Did London Marathon in 2011, I think, 2010 maybe. Obviously thought that was the only, actually no, that was later, I don't know, but did London Marathon around then. Obviously thought that was the only marathon that there was, and again that nobody had ever run any further than that ever. And did that, loved it, best event in the world, just phenomenal. Really enjoyed that. Did some other half marathons and stuff like that. Anyway, did all of that, moved out to Rochester on the North Downs Way, joined a triathlon club, and that's where I was then exposed to ultra running. So we had two members of that club, Gordon and John was training for MDS and Gordon was doing Centurion 100 milers. I'd never, this whole concept of running 100 miles or doing MDS's Marathon des Sables, if that's gone over you, or doing 7 days in the Moroccan desert, that had just never even occurred to me as being a thing. So when they said about doing that, I was, oh, this seems crazy. I'll see what it's about. So Gordon had suggested that I volunteer at the North Downs Way 100 in 2014 to then see what it was like and whether I thought I could do it, because if you then volunteered, you then got free entry for the event the next year. Okay, fine. So I volunteered at the North Downs Way 100 2014, which was, from memory, I think I started at 3 p.m. and finished at 7 a.m. My wife couldn't believe I was volunteering, all like, just these things were completely foreign concepts to us. I hadn't got a clue what it was about. So did that, thought, yeah, that looks like I could do that maybe. So then spent the year training for it, ready for the next year. Part of that training, because we were down in Kent at that point, was running in a Saxons, Vikings and Normans, so an SVN for those of you that know, one of their 6-hour events. And again, you know, my little blinkered life, I'd never seen events like this before. The concept seemed really simple, really good, and I was like, oh, this is quite good fun. So that was, I want to say, March 2015 that I did that event. At which point, maybe 6 weeks later, we found out that we were going to be having twins. So that wasn't really the plan to have twins. The plan was to have one. I don't think many people plan for twins. If you do, you're mad. So anyway, so we found out we're having twins. So I was teaching at this point, which I really enjoyed, but used to take up all my life without children, let alone then adding kids into the mix, and then adding two at one point, or two, not at one point, adding two. So that sort of changed plans quite a lot. Anyway, so that's going on. In regards to running, my first ultra was technically at, or not technically, my first ultra was at that SVN event, which I think I won, well, I did win, in I think something like 38, 36, something like that miles that I did in the 6 hours. But I really enjoyed the format, and it was lovely to be at an event where clearly so many people knew each other, just do my own thing, see lots of people of different shapes, sizes, everybody running around, and it was just something that I'd never seen before, which is essentially what Big Bear is based from, right? It's different. It's a different sort of running format. Anyway, so I did that. Did South Downs Way 50 was my first sort of point-to-point ultra. Did that in the April, and then got on the start line for the 100, and I made it to 72 miles. So I still not done 100 miles. At this point, Sophie was 6 months pregnant. While I was doing the 100 miler, I knew this was going to be my last attempt at 100 miles for a very long time, because I knew that having twins or just having one was going to change the way that I could do my training. So I was like, right, that's that done. And I still haven't gone back to 100 miles. Maybe I will. I don't see a massive draw to it at the moment. I enjoy doing the ultras. 50 miles is a good day out and is sort of all right training wise, so it's not sort of too all encompassing. I think if I went up to 100 miles, that's then a whole weekend rather than a day. I think the training amount, I just think that would be a step too far at the moment, but never say never, who knows. So I did that, and then, like I say, trains turn up, life gets turned upside down. We move away, so we move back up to the Midlands, so that we're then closer to some family. And I don't want to teach. I want to do something where I can be at home to see the kids. I don't want to be paying out more in childcare fees than I earned as a sort of head of department type thing that I was when I left. So I had this idea of starting something similar to the SVN events that I'd been to, and then sort of take a bit more of a Centurion vibe on it. So sort of trying to mix the two things together that I'd enjoyed the most and put my own spin on it. So that's where Big Bear Events came from. The naming of it, who knows really. So I wanted the idea to be and this is my poor level of English, I'm going to say adjective plus a noun, and an animal based one. So I didn't want it to make it massively gendered, obviously, because then that's really silly. I was conscious, even in 2017 when we're doing the naming, that calling it the biggest brutalist whateverist wasn't really gonna sort of sell the events as they really were, but was also going to put off a lot of people that didn't want to come to something that was supposedly meant to be brutal when really it was running laps around a park. So I sort of stayed clear of that. Big, I think, is fine. Like it's not sort of massively gendered. It's not super aggressive. It's, it can be big and cuddly. It doesn't have to be sort of brutal. You can't be brutal and cuddly. Like it's not a thing, is it? And so I wanted to get something that I could make a nice logo for, and it wouldn't sort of put people off. So that's where we came with that. There's not much of a story to that, to be honest. Anyway, so that was in 2017, and then effectively, I was just explaining to one of my twins yesterday actually, that we used to then go around. So I was at home with the kids at this point, sort of full time, and part of our weekly activity would be going to a different park. So we'd drive for an hour, because then they could sleep in the car. We'd then walk around for an hour, so I could get a bit of a take on what the venue is like. We'd have a tea cake because that's what they were eating at the time, and then we'd come home. And that's what we did pretty much once a week for a good chunk of months. The brilliance of being up here, so I'm based in Rugby, this is in Rugby. The brilliance of being up here is that there are country parks everywhere. There's just unbelievable amount of country parks that you can get to within an hour. I've used, I want to say 20 different venues within an hour's drive of here, plus Cannock that's a little bit further, but there's 20 odd venues that I can get to easily, and I've not been to all of them. There are some that are a little bit too small or whatever, but just the amount of open green space that is usable up here is phenomenal. So once we then had a little look around, worked out which venues I wanted to use, contacted the venues, we were then ready to go in 2018. So 2018, so I think I might have those dates a little bit wrong. I might have set it up in 2016, planned it all 2017, ready to go 2018. That's right. So my view on all of this is that if you pay lots of money for something, then you expect lots. And if there are lots of people at something and something goes wrong, it's harder to manage. So I went with incredibly cheap entries at £16 an event and low numbers at capping at 50 people per event. So what that then led to was events that sold out 9 months before they were due and not loads of people at them. So it wasn't really, that first year, we did 5 events in that first year, starting at Ryton Pools, February 1st, 2018, 50 people, 2 gazebos, easy, perfect. Everything went pretty smoothly. There were no major dramas. What I also did that first year as well is I had a season ticket, so you could enter the 5 events and it was then discounted entry, which I think then meant some people were paying something like £12 per event. And this isn't £12 an event in 1980, this is £12 an event in 2018. So although it was 8 years ago, it's not that long ago. So that was an absolute bargain. But I still stick by that being the sort of smart thing to do. It makes me laugh, makes me sad, I don't know what the right word is, when I see people put on their first event and they have 1,000 people turn up paying £25 for a 5k that then goes wrong. And it's just crazy. Like, why not sort of have a first go, just get it under your feet so you know what's going to go wrong. If there's less people there and they're not paid as much, they'll just cut you some slack. So with that first event, obviously there were small mistakes, but there was nothing catastrophic. But there were little mistakes. So Coca-Cola. So this is something that I go on about quite a bit, and it sounds really pathetic, really, but it's not. So that first event, you go to the shop, right? We need to get Coca-Cola. I know that. So I'll buy some Aldi, whatever, own brand cola, because that's something like 2p per litre compared to Coca-Cola, which is 12p per litre. So why am I going to pay 6 times the amount? What I didn't realise, because I don't drink the stuff myself, is that the cola is sort of a bit of sugar and a ton of sweeteners, whereas Coca-Cola is mainly sugar. And I think when I started, it was more sugar. So I think they've put sweeteners into Coca-Cola now because of the sugar tax. But anyway, so I didn't realise that there was a difference. So I'm not stupid enough to have bought Diet Coke, because I obviously know that there's less sugar in Diet Coke. But I just assumed that cola was effectively the same as Coca-Cola. Anyway, so that was some of the feedback that I got, that I shouldn't have put Diet Coke on the A station. I was like, no, I didn't put Diet Coke on, I'm not stupid. And so then I started looking at the labels and realised that there was a difference. So since that first event, for the 100+ events we've had since, it's always been Coca-Cola. So it's little things like that if you go to other events, and if it's just cola everywhere, they're not checking those details, or they don't want to pay the difference because they don't think there's any difference, which means that they probably don't run those distances, or, I mean, they might not use Coca-Cola. And sometimes if you're asking volunteers to do food shops for you and things like that, they think they're doing you a favour by saving you £10 per aid station or whatever it is. But it's little things like that if you go to an event and they've got Coca-Cola and some other little bits, you can tell they're trying to take care of you. Because it might only seem small that, I don't know, a bottle of cola's 40p and a bottle of Coca-Cola's £2.20 or something. But you add that up 15 times per 100 events, it adds up. Like, it's those little pennies that when you add them all together, that's the profit that you make out of these events. So you've got to be a bit careful with these things, but there are certain corners that you can't cut, and Coca-Cola is one of them. So Coca-Cola at the first event was one problem, and then we use Right and Pulls. So if you've not run at Right and Pulls before, effectively there is one track that does a big loop of the park. There's not really anywhere else to go. So I thought that after 4 hours, everybody would know where they're going. We'll go and take the signs down. It'll all be fine. Which obviously, when you say it out loud in hindsight, is probably a bit silly. But I just thought, we want to get the volunteers off home. So if we take them down early, then that's fine. And then we did that on the day. And I remember Judith, who still comes to our events, who's an absolute legend. She was not very happy that I'd taken the signs down because she said she didn't know where to go. And it makes complete sense. And so we've never done that since. Personally, when I've been to somewhere once, I can then get back there. It sounds arrogant, but I've got a very good sense of direction and I don't struggle with things like that at all. However, if you don't have great sense of direction or sort of memory of where you're going, and you've been following arrows and nobody told you that the arrows were going to come down and suddenly there are no arrows, I can see why that's really silly. So obviously we never did that again. And there were some other little things. I mean, the biggest one being that it was a little bit windy. I mean, it wasn't windy, but there was a little bit of wind, and that was enough to absolutely destroy my £70 gazebos from eBay. And so first thing I then did when we got back was buy some proper gazebos from a gazebo shop that is in Banbury, which isn't too far from here. So I drove down there, bought 2 proper gazebos. I think I had a grant from the Trail Running Association to help with that as well, because they're £400 odd each, so they're expensive. But those gazebos, the original ones are still going. I've now got 8 of them, something like that, I think. And you just have to have the professional kit. Like, the difference between something that's made from slightly strong tinfoil to industrial grade steel is just like night and day. And those gazebos will hopefully do another 100 events. They're not showing any sign of breaking anytime soon. So that was a really good investment. But when you're starting out and you're just trying to do something to see if it's going to work, you struggle with that. You don't know whether you're going to have to sort of sell all this stuff again because it didn't work. So that's why you sort of buy these cheaper things and you try and cut some corners to start with. But obviously, having sold all these events out, having got the volunteers, which was pretty amazing as well, that was the biggest worry, and is always the biggest worry really, is getting volunteers for these events. But having known that I managed to get volunteers just from nowhere really is brilliant, and that meant that I knew this was going to work. So year 1, 5 events, Right and Pulls, Saucy Forest, which I pronounce wrong every time and I'm super conscious about. So Saucy or Saucy, however I'm meant to pronounce it. I can't remember what the other venues were, but we used 5. Rugby as well, so we went up and down the Great Central Way, which we're returning to again this year. And then there was another one that I probably should have looked at before I started doing this, but I can't remember what the other venues were. But we used those venues, and then in the second year, I'd obviously sort of all these little trips I've been doing with the kids when they were still at nursery, which they still were at this point. But on those 5 days, we could put them into, they were sort of nursery, so they could stay in nursery for a bit longer, and it was fine. Worked easily. And then the next year, I stepped that up to 11 events. So it's like, right, we're going to have a proper go at this. So 11 events, 2019, brilliant. All went really well. Up the numbers from 50 to 100 per event, and I think the majority of them sold out from memory, but didn't have an issue with entries. Everything was going up in terms of me actually being able to make a business out of it. Numbers going up, reach going up, excellent. Everything was swimming. So 2020 was going to be the proper year that I could make a business and a living, only a small living, because the whole point of my working life, I guess, is to be around for the kids. So it depends how you want to phrase it, but I guess primary parent is the way to phrase it. I take them to school about half the time, but I'm there every evening to pick them up from school. I'm there all holidays. I'm there to sort of be the main person, which I guess generally in life tends to fall to mums and to women, but that's not how our life here is set up. But it meant that I had to find a job that fits around that. So I could go and teach, but then I'd be spending all night marking and doing other work, and it wouldn't really work for me. It's not what I want to do. So I had to find something that was going to fit around it. So apart from on event days and on very, very rare occasions, I'm at the school gate to pick them up. So it works, and I don't plan events. That's why the events aren't planned during the week. During the holidays, because the one event we did during the holiday then caused me absolute grief to then sort out, sort of having people to look after the kids and so on. So it just doesn't really work for me. So that's what we do. I can't remember what I was about to say, but yeah, 2020 was going to be the year it was all going to go. And then there was a bit of a bug that went around that obviously ruined all of that. But the start of the year was great. So February was really good. And then I had an event scheduled for, I want to say the 23rd of March 2020. And I think we went into lockdown on the 20th. And I remember I called my event off the day before we were told we were going to be locked down. So the day before Boris did one of his little announcements, I called my event off because I could see it wasn't going to be safe. My parents come to every single event. I didn't want to make them ill. I didn't want to be ill. Crazy. Anyway, so that was the first event that was cancelled. And I think I then had to cancel maybe 10 or 15 events. So the whole year was ruined. Some places, some people held events and they managed to get through that. I couldn't. So a lot of the places that I was using, so Forestry England sites especially, they were not allowing groups to gather. So I remember doing an event at Cannock Chase in the late September, and they wouldn't allow me to have events bigger than 30 people. But up the road in Staffordshire, there'd been Ironman Staffs, which was 1,500 people. So they were doing that, different people obviously, but the same area of the country, the same time, because I think their event was on the Sunday and mine was on the Wednesday. So they had 1,500 odd people up the road, and I could have 30 people in the woods on a Wednesday or whatever it was. So that was very, very frustrating. And so I did a few of those events where I just wanted to put events on because I was sick of cancelling stuff and I hated it. So I did sort of double days. So I had 30 people on one day and then 30 people on the next day. So I did that a few times with Forestry England sites. I think the county councils, obviously they had more important things to do than worry about me putting some people running around during the week. So they just wouldn't let me put events on anywhere because they were worried they were going to get blowback. So 2021, sort of Aprilish time, was when really I could stop cancelling events. But people just weren't coming back. The industry had changed quite a lot, and it was difficult. It was difficult because you'd have one really good event and then you'd have three where numbers were really low, and you couldn't really put your finger on it. And I don't think it was really anything that I was doing. It was just the way that the industry was. People were scared to go back out into groups. People had realised that they hadn't run events for a year and they didn't really need the events because they just enjoyed the running part of it. And so they then stopped going, or they went from doing 10 events a year to doing 3 events a year. Well, if I'm one of those 7 that they don't do, then I'm going to be missing out. And at the same time, as much as the number of runners effectively has gone down, or the number of people wanting to do events, people are still creating new events all the time. So there's more supply and less demand, so it's never really going to be great. So as much as there were companies that were going out of business really, really quickly during COVID, people were still putting on new events all the time as well. So it's an odd mix, very odd mix. So 2021 and 2022 were not great, just because it was so sporadic and so up and down. But obviously these were the years where I was meant to sort of kick on and turn sort of it into a proper business. So luckily for me being able to eat and our family being able to survive, my wife has a more stable job that earns nicely. Otherwise, I had no money coming in because there were no events to put on. So it was really, really difficult times. But 2023, it started to get back to normal. And from 2023 onwards, it's a bit of a cliche phrase, but that was the new normal. So what we're at today is just how it is. So from 2023 onwards, that's sort of how it's been. And there's been sort of some patterns that I can look at. So we've had sort of good spells and bad spells, but generally speaking, the events are starting to grow. People sort of know what Big Bear Events is. It's really nice that people associate 6-hour events in the Midlands with Big Bear Events. So I've had people say to me before that they were describing going to an event. Like, oh, what, a Big Bear one? No, they're a different company. And it's nice that people just think that I'm the Midlands 6-hour event person, I guess. Not everybody thinks that, but it's nice that some people do. So it's good that the brand, the name is getting out there to lots of different people, because that's the most difficult part, is trying to get people to know who you are, and also to then have to explain a slightly quirky format to people, and do that all while they're just being just piled with just noise of other adverts about everything, rah, 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 rah. So to try and break through that noise is pretty much what my whole job is. The actual organising of the events and proper event admin is only a very small part of my day-to-day work. The majority of my time is spent trying to break through that noise to try and grow the company. And I mean, this is the company, me standing in a room at 6 o'clock in the morning to record these, but the idea is never to have events with 10,000 people at them, or to have 500 people at the 6-hour events, but it's to make sure that at every single event we sell them out at the numbers that they sort of are now. So the 6-hour events, I don't think it would really work, not at many places anyway, to go, if it went over 150 people, it would be too many people and it would lose that nice sort of personal touch. So at the moment, I'm sort of capping entries at about 125 people, and the first 2 events pretty much got to that. They sort of sold out. The next 2 events look like they're going to do that as well, and those numbers are good because I can, it's a business, so I can make some money at that number, but also you don't feel like you're just a big cog in the massive machine. I really like calling everybody's name out when they cross the line, and find on that first lap, when everybody crosses the line and you get your name called out, it might be that I sound like I'm just sort of hammering through names, especially if 10 of you cross the line at the same time, and effectively I am. But on every other lap, people are crossing in on their own, or 2 or 3 of them or whatever, and just being able to call everybody's name out is just really nice, and it adds such a personal touch to it. which you just don't get at many events really. It's just not really how these things work, because if you're doing, I don't know, Abingdon Marathon and you're one of 500 people or 1,000 people or whatever they get, it's just not how it's a different environment. So I really like the numbers that we've got. The business can do what the business needs to do in terms of money at those numbers. The difficulty that I had sort of, I guess, post COVID was I'd have one a week with 120 people, and then the next week I'd have 35. And so that's where you can't make a business work, when you don't know what you're going to get. But these first few events have sort of started the year off really nicely. And so at these numbers, that's when I say grow the business. What I mean is to sustain getting those numbers over time, because people will do the event, they might come and do it 2 or 3 times, and then they'll go and do something else. So you've got to keep feeding people in to make sure that you maintain those numbers. Obviously, we've got some people that come year after year. Brian has been coming from the beginning, from 2018, pretty much to nearly every 6-hour event that I've put on. So I think he's maybe up to 60 plus events with me, which is amazing. But I can't expect everybody to do that. So it's important to just kind of keep feeding people in the bottom of the chain and try and get them to keep coming back. I like to think, I always say that I don't think we've got really good retention rates. So over half the people do more than one event. But because it's midweek, people's life gets in the way. So, if you're working and you took one day off and it just happened to be a day where one of my events was, brilliant, you come and run it, but you might not get that chance again. It doesn't mean that you didn't want to come and run it again, but it's about trying to make it that I keep putting more and more people into that machine, so then they keep telling their friends, and have you tried this? And that's how the business grows. So that's what I mean by growth. And that's about it really. So now we tend to put on about 20 events a year, and that's sort of going to be about the limit, I think. I've got all this way through, 30 plus minutes in, and I've not even explained the midweek element to it. So this was great planning. I've written down a little plan, but I didn't even write that bit down. Excellent. So the reason that we do the midweek, which is probably pretty clear, I guess, is to fit around my family life really, and other people's. So it works. So much linked into what I just said, I'm not going to get 1,000 people on a Tuesday in February. That's fine. I don't want to do that. But I'll get 100. And so that's really good, because what people don't realise, unless you are that, is that so many people don't work Monday to Friday 9 to 5 in an office. It's just not how modern Britain really works when it comes to working environments. We've got so many blue light service people at our events. If you want to get seen by a doctor, come to one of our events, and there'll be one of them running. There'll be nurses there, there'll be firefighters, police, because they work shifts. So a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. isn't the most convenient every week. It might be fine sometimes, but a lot of the time it's not. We get loads of people that work in retail that come to our events because they're in the shops at the weekend for us to go to, so they get time off during the week. We get people that are self-employed. So, if you're a freelancer or you're self-employed, you can rearrange your time a little bit to come and run. So it might be, and believe me, I'm not saying that if you're self-employed and you take a day off, then you can do what you want, because I appreciate you don't get paid, right? I do understand how that works. But if you are a consultant and you want to come for a run for 3 hours in the morning, brilliant, come for a run for 3 hours in the morning and work a little bit later in the evening, and no one's really any the wiser. So people are more flexible with what they do. We get people pretty much at every single event, somebody will be like, oh, just took a work call. And that's absolutely fine. That's brilliant. That's the joy of the events, is that you can do that. So you can be running around doing these events, and you can sort of be keeping on top of work. Everything's good. So like I said, I know it doesn't work for everybody, right? I remember, I haven't had it so much recently actually, but in the first couple of years, I just get emailed by teachers saying, well, I can't do it, I've got a bit of school. It's like, okay, fine. Teaching is the exception to the rule, because everybody else can just take a day off if they want to. And that's what we get. And it just works really nicely because even in the sort of cliche, traditional, works Monday to Friday, man goes to work, mum stays at home, it's not really how the world works. But even in that cliche environment, weekends are very precious if you've got kids. Either you've got older kids and you ferry them about everywhere, or you've got younger kids and you want to spend time with them because they won't stay young very long. So if you can, and if you want to keep doing your running and you want to keep doing long distance exercise, if you can take a day's holiday in the week to get one of those runs in, then it works quite nicely. And like I say, I appreciate it's an incredibly cliched, sort of old style looking at things, and that can be mum can be working, dad can be at home, whatever it is. But having that bit during the week can just fit really nicely for people for lots of different reasons. So unless you're a teacher, it works quite nicely. And it's annoying because every now and then it just works for somebody who does work in a school because of the way that the dates fall or whatever it is. And they're like, oh, I wish I could come back and do more of these, but I can just never get to them. So that is frustrating. And as my kids get older, these things might change. But the joy of it as well is that we can go to places that on a Sunday morning just aren't available to us. So Salty Forest, whenever we go back there, on a Friday in March, there's going to be like, I don't know, 10 dog walkers and a couple of toddlers. Brilliant. If we go back there on a Saturday and we run laps on the same bit that we do, it's just full of people. I mean, even with the Trailfest events that we do there on a Sunday, the start-finish bit is quite busy with people, but that's why the course then just goes far out, because people don't tend to venture too far away from the cafe when they go to these forests. So it's fine for that event because we don't bring people close to the visitor centre en masse really, particularly often. But I wouldn't want to be doing a 6-hour event there. The same with at Wrighton Pools. When we were there a couple of weeks ago, no one there. A few dog walkers that are surprised to see us. Apart from that, no one else is there. You go on a Saturday or Sunday, absolutely rammed, right? There's a reason the car park holds 300 odd people, because they'll fill it up. And the paths aren't particularly wide. It would be awful for you to be running, but also it'd be awful for the visitors. So we don't want to do that. So they pretty much wouldn't let me do it. So it works that we can do it during the week because we can get better venues. It works around a lot of people's family life. It works around my family life. And it's a great format for doing it. But it's really difficult to explain to people. So what I'm planning on doing, and this is why doing these podcasts, is to try to show people what sort of people come to these events, try and add a bit more nuance around what's going on and so on. And then I'm also going to try and do more videos to explain what's going on. So all I'm trying to do at the moment is just explain what we do. We've got thousands of people coming to these events every year, so they work, but it's just trying to explain it to more and more people so that we can keep feeding more and more people in, so we can keep selling events out, so I can then make a proper business out of this, make money and keep on doing it for year after year. I'm not going to be turning up in a Bentley anytime soon by any stretch, but I want to be making sure that it's worth the time. I mean, I spend every waking minute doing this stuff, so I need to make sure that I can keep doing that. As long as what I'm doing is going to earn me more money than it would do if I went and worked at Tesco's 9 till 3 every day, then that's what I'll keep doing. So like I say, this isn't some way to make your millions, not at the level that I'm doing it anyway, but if I keep doing what I'm doing, then it works and I enjoy it and it's great doing what we're doing, but it just needs to be at this level. If it's at the 2021 level where it's so up and down, it just doesn't really work. So I'm glad that I sort of kept going, because now it's really good. I know I've got a big community of runners that are there to come back and that will talk well of the events to get even more people back. So that's the plan. So 2026 and beyond, the plan is to essentially keep things the same, maybe change a few venues, go back to some other places. It'd be really nice to try and find a big sort of country manor to put on a Trailfest event at. So if anybody's got any suggestions, if there's anybody still listening this far in, if anybody's got any suggestions as to where we could do that, that would be really good. But I'm sort of struggling a little bit. But I know that there's Northamptonshire places where I'm sure they hire them out for weddings, and it's very similar to a wedding, just a bit less white. So that's the plan for 2026 and beyond. Hopefully this will stand the test of time, and when you listen to this in many years' time, I'll have stuck to what I said. But yeah, that's like a very short / long history of Big Bear events. So if you've got this far, well done. The format will return to normal. I'd imagine if you're listening to this in real time, there's a good chance that I'm going to be running down a mountain and still somehow doing 4,000 feet of elevation while running down a mountain, which I can't quite get my head around, doing Trans-Gran Canaria, which is an amazing event. And then after Trans-Gran Canaria, we've got the Badger Challenge, and I'll do a pod after that as well to recap the Badger Challenge in the lead up to the Elephant Challenge, which is the week after. And then there's a little break until Trailfest. In that little break, I'm race directing the 100 Hills 50k with Centurion, so I don't get a break. But this period between New Year's and essentially London Marathon / Easter is really, really busy time. Lots of people want to run, so I want to put on lots of events. So that's been the slight change for this year, and it's worked really well. So we'll do the same again next year. So well done. That's 40 plus minutes of me just rabbiting on. So you've done well to get there. Right, until the next time, thanks very much.